In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. The foundation of every meaningful relationship is trust, built not through perfection, but through presence. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin. Today we explore the psychology of connection, the science of rebuilding trusts, and the emotional courage it takes to truly love and be loved. Dr. Dan Sneider is a licensed therapist and founder of Growth and Gratitude, PLLC, where he helps individuals and couples strengthen truths. Trust deepens, intimacy deepens, and feels safe in emotional vulnerability. With a background that spans a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in social work, and a doctorate in education that combines academics' expertise with real-life experience as a father, partner, and therapist. His work centers on helping clients navigate the complexities of anxiety, infidelity, and disconnections in a modern world, using gratitude, empathy, and connection with communication as bridges back to love. His story is one of resilience, healing, and rediscovering, a reminder that our relationships are a mirror reflecting how deeply we know ourselves. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. It supports how more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Dan Sneider, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing very well today, Sam. Yeah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. You have a very smoothing sort of voice and energy to you. So I think this will be a calm but very insightful episodes. But to kick us off, please tell us more about growth and gratitude.
Well, absolutely. So the name of my business comes from my personal values. So growth and gratitude is something that I'm focused on every single day, and every time that I, open my computer or talk with someone, I'm reminded of what I'm focused on, what I'm working towards. And so I really enjoy taking my clients through that process. So I'm a therapist, I'm an educator. The majority of my work these days is with couples. And within my business, Growth and Gratitude, I created a program called the Intimacy Shift. And I've found that in all of our relationships, things change over time, right? And the intimacy we experience in relationships shifts also. And so I created this program as a way to help couples, weather those ups and downs in their relationships and create deeper, more meaningful, intimate connections emotionally, physically, and I've seen a lot of success with the couples that I work with, and I really enjoy, helping people. And I'm sure we'll talk more about where that comes from for me, but that's an overview of the work that I do.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yes, that's exactly what we're going to be starting. Actually, is you taking us back to, I suppose, the beginning of all this. Obviously, you're a doctor, so you require a doctorate amounts many things. So I suppose this gift of yours, or I suppose even this interest of yours of helping people, and even from more of an emotional perspective, for obviously nowadays, what does that come from for you?
Yeah. Such a broad question, where you're gonna hear all about me, and you may actually meet my cats. I just had one of my cats jump on my lap. So where that begins for me. So I grew up in a household. It was like all of our households, very interesting the way that I grew up, and there was emotional abuse in my home that was very normalized. I didn't see a whole lot of affection and meaningful connection between my parents and my household.
Right.
And at the same time, my mom, who's an incredible person, emotionally sensitive and kind, really did want me to be the sensitive, caring person that I am today. And at an early age, that was not where I was headed. I was an angry person, lashing out, depressed. And when my parents separated, I went on my own journey through therapy and learning about myself. And it was in those teenage years when I was in therapy for the first time that I realized how much I enjoyed learning about my feelings, creating meaningful relationships. And that was what I wanted to do with my career, with my life. That getting in deep with other people, going through those hard things and coming out the other side was what I wanted to spend my time doing. So, yeah, it was very much from an early age that even though I struggled with depression and I struggled with this anger, that I knew underneath all of that, I did have the caring, the kindness, and the desire to connect deeply with people. And so it was from kind of that mix of things that I did in school get a degree in psychology as an undergraduate, and right away wanted to start working with people as quickly as I could. So as soon as I got that degree in psychology, I did two things at the same time. I went to graduate school for my master's degree, and I also started working right away where I was living in Chicago. So I started working in a residential treatment center for kids and for teenagers with really severe emotional difficulties. And I loved that work. It was every day something new, every day a new opportunity to connect with people, to, like I said, really get in deeply and just learn about other people. I'm fascinated by other people. Where I'm sure going to talk more about that and what I've learned along the way. But I am just endlessly interested in people's stories, how they got to where they are, how we can change, and getting back to growth and gratitude, how we can grow over time and overcome the circumstances where we come from.
Yeah, beautiful. We definitely share this interest of learning about people and this fascinating aspect that um, truly we're, as much as we are different, and that's what makes the flavor of the human species. We're so alike in so many ways that I think we underestimate that as a society also. And perhaps one of the things you mentioned, which is interesting, is underneath this layer of anger that you had, you understood that you had this intention and this desire of meaningful connections. Do you think we don't we all perhaps have that? Is that just innate to who we are as people? Perhaps um, to desire these deeply meaningful connections in the work that you're doing, even with problematic, basically children's. Did you? Yeah, did you always sense that, no matter perhaps how hard the childhood or the environment of that person was?
Yeah, yeah. Excellent question. And so, short answer, yes, we are all wired for connection. That's absolutely at our core. And what the difference is kind of how much scar tissue is layered on top of that.
Right.
How much we are buried underneath either our trauma or our protective walls and barriers that we build to get through hard times. So there's sometimes more awareness that we are wired for connection, and it's something that we seek out. We know we want, we know we deserve to be connected, and sometimes we're less aware and feel less deserving. Oftentimes that's what I encounter with people and with couples, is there's a core belief that we're not worthy of love, we don't deserve it, or that if other people really knew the
Yeah.
real us, if they really knew who we were, they wouldn't like us. And so we hide, excuse me, we hide or we protect ourselves or we act out in ways that make it a self fulfilling prophecy. So if I say or do something to push you away and then you go away, I knew it all along. I knew that I wasn't lovable. And so we do have that wiring for connection, but uncovering it and really allowing it to blossom, believing that at our core we are lovable is the work for many of us. And that was my work too.
Right. And within that work, you talk about your mother being such an amazing person and a quintessential person. Um, was she the one that sort of slowly but surely sort of made you realize that under that layer again, you were I suppose, a beautiful being? Was it somebody, was it a therapist of yours? I suppose, tell me more about how that transition sort of unfolded for you.
Yeah. Yeah, so I really credit that relationship with my mom with keeping me um safe and with keeping that goodness, alive within me. And yeah, it was certainly a journey because from my early years, I wasn't protected in my home. I was exposed to a lot of things that were harmful and damaging, and so um, there was a lot of pain there associated with that relationship with my mom, and until many years later, and she has her own story, right? As we all do. Everybody comes from somewhere, and I know now that she was doing the very best that she could. And, eventually over time, our relationship came back together. I learned a lot more about her story, and her life has changed so much in the time since, right? She was on her own path of learning and development. And so since that young childhood, that I had in that home, she has learned so much about herself, and I've seen her on her journey of growth. And I've learned a great deal about strength and resilience from her. So that was a big part of it for me. And like I mentioned, being in therapy from an early age, really looking up to that first therapist that I had and seeing a role model for a kind, caring, male adult in my life that could show feelings, that could show connection and love. That was very meaningful for me too. And as an adult, like I said, you're going to hear all about me. I've had so many experiences as an adult where I've learned and grown as a person. In the last several years, a big part of my journey has been uh, really facing and coming to terms with my addictive personality and joining a recovery program and joining a fellowship of other people who similarly want to transform their lives for the better and really do that hard work to change the things that they had been doing that were causing harm. So that's another path that we can go down, is being in recovery and joining that 12-step program and how much of a positive influence that's had on my life.
Yeah, 100%. The You talk a lot about trust, right? You do a lot of therapy now with couples, and obviously the foundation of a healthy and pretty much every healthy relationships with yourself, with the creator, if you believe in such things, with others certainly, is the trust factor. I recall a quote that always marked me from George McDonald, which was, to be trusted is greater compliment than to be loved. And for various reasons, I really believe that that is the case. I For you, obviously, when you're thinking as trust as the sort of the keystone, if you will, to repair ruptures, to rebuild safety, to create that basically a conditions of honest dialogue. Um, I'm interested, since trust was something that seemed to be quite shaky in the early age of perhaps your relationships inside your household. For you, let's define terms first and foremost. What does it mean for to be trusted in a loving relationship? What has you been sort of seeing as a definition of what is basically the very nature of such a somewhat blurry concept for a lot of people?
Mm. Yeah. So much of what I talk about with trust building is consistency. So it sounds simple, but of course, hard to do. But showing up when you say you're going to show up, following through with the things that you say is the foundation for trust building. And so trust can feel like a blurry concept. And so I break it down into actions, right? What are the
Right.
behaviors that show that we are trustworthy? And then that feeling will emerge over time. And so consistency of action and not over promising and then under delivering, which, is a tendency that all of us have. Many people want to please. We want to say that we're going to do all of these things, and then maybe fall short. So it's setting expectations, with things that I am going to be able to accomplish or complete and following through on those things. So, consistency, number one, and then being honest as well. There are times where I may have said that I was going to do something, and if I'm not able to do it, I don't want to lash out or blame my partner or make excuses, right? That's going to break that trust. I need to honestly share if I'm not able to do something or if something happened in the wrong way, I said or did the wrong thing, to be able to honestly take that accountability, responsibility, and say what happened. Those are the two main pillars underlying trust that I help my couples to work through and to build.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. In the case of trust needing to be repaired, we all fall short once in a while. And we do have the tendency of over promising. I think certainly with maturity, you gain you have a better grasp over that concept, and therefore perhaps you can be a bit better at not over promising. But it is something that I think affect us all. What's the first sort of smallest intervention that you perhaps preach to start the trust repair process if such breach occur?
Mm-hmm. So there's a few things that can happen right away. So first and foremost, acknowledging it, right? And that's a much deeper topic we can go into, but often acknowledging where we've fallen short is a struggle and something that, we may not have learned growing up. There may be shame there, embarrassment, and that again, feeling of unlovability, unworthiness. If I have fallen short, if the other person finds out, will they still love me? Will they still care about me? So it circles back to some of those underlying beliefs about ourselves. And so, that again comes back to trust in the relationship. So if we have a strong foundation for trust, I'm going to be much easier able to acknowledge when I've done something wrong because it's not going to lead to the end of the relationship or the other person will no longer love or care about me. So if I have that, foundation of trust where I know the other person cares deeply about me, if I have made a mistake, I know that I can be honest, share that with the person, and it's going to be okay. Just like if they make a mistake and they acknowledge it, it's going to be okay. I will still love them. I will still care about them. So much of it flows back and forth from one person in the relationship to the other. And, really being able to number one, acknowledge what's happened without defensiveness, without explaining. There's an acronym that I use often, JADE, JADE. So justifying, anger, defensiveness, or explaining. Anytime we're doing those things, we're going to hurt trust in the relationship. So if I've done something wrong and I'm justifying it, I have an angry reaction, I'm defending myself, or I'm trying to explain why I did it, the other person is going to really struggle with trusting me the best thing I can do is very concisely, quickly say, you know what, I made this mistake. I recognize it was a mistake. I feel bad about it. Here's what I can do differently the next time. And we go forward from there.
It really is that simple. It really is. It's a to me as a young man. Also, there's this moment where you attach self worth with this misunderstanding in which you are above making mistakes. I really felt that a long time in my life, actually, and now came to realize that such thing is not possible. And you are perhaps, I like to see it as a sort of different roads. So I used to think that there was a road of success, and that road of success was pavement gold, and there was nothing basically of nothing to be ashamed of, and it was nothing but, I suppose, sun and breeze. And on the other side was the road of failure, and that's where you have all these mistakes and so on. And came very much to realize through entrepreneurships, in my case, but also in my relationships, that that is that is a utopia, understanding of the world. Your life is very much one road, and on that road will be many mistakes, many hurdles, many perhaps shameful moments, which I believe a, a lot of them, specifically if you think about relationship as a whole. To me, one thing I want to talk to you about is for those in which have high expectation of themselves, and I'm very much one of those people. Your doctorates, most of our audience are business owners, obviously. One thing that I struggle with, and I still struggle with it, Dan, maybe you can help me on this, is how can I keep the standards, the high standard basically for myself and for my partner, but in a way in which doesn't feel like I am imposing that high standard on the other person, that I'm actually trying to do such thing for the growth perhaps of our relationships. There seems to be a difficult balance for me to grasp, and I'm wondering, how do you typically help those couples typically to understand that what's the obviously healthy couples. I'm not saying that this cannot be toxic in any ways, but it's a healthy relationships. How can we make it so it is perceived as helping each other instead of trying to sort of win the ego contest, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, excellent question. And I love that aspect of, achievement in relationships. Not that it's a competition, but we want a deep, meaningful, juicy relationship. We want to accomplish big things together. I think that's very much a good thing. And it's not about wanting to change the other person, but maybe more about getting the best out of ourselves, the
Right.
best out of our relationship. And how can we do that in a way that is both gentle, not forcing change, but also progressive, so that we are moving forward together. I love that. And one of the big takeaways from this program I mentioned earlier, the intimacy shift that I developed, is a framework for having conversations. So, being able to sit with our partners and to feel safe and to be able to talk about our goals, to talk about the things that we want to achieve or the things that are not going well that we want to correct and work on. Being able to have those conversations is not something that I learned in school, that many of us saw in our households growing up. And so that's been a key part of my journey and my education as a therapist, is learning how to do that and then teaching others. So what I'd say for that is, being able to sit with our partners regularly. I recommend that couples put on their calendar a relationship conversation, a relationship check-in. It could be once a week, it could be once a month, but they have a structured time to sit down and talk about their relationship. And like you mentioned, it could be a conversation about our goals, how we take our relationship from where we are to the next level. And there may be things that I, as an individual in the relationship, need to change and work on. There may be things that you need to change and work on. But there's a structured conversation where, as a team, we talk about it together. And so having that mechanism for talking about things really helps couples. Otherwise, it comes out in, you know, comments on the side, or like, oh, you're not doing this, or I messed that up. But it's not part of a larger conversation where we can really address what's happening and work on it.
Right. You mentioned intimacy twice now already, and obviously it is the name of your program. Um, to me, and we have one of our clients, lovely clients, that is also a sort of a sex therapist, I suppose, and she's amazing at what she does. And really, we had a conversation on this podcast already with her, and we talk about the fact that we live in by far the most sexualized world, maybe in the history of mankind, but certainly over the last few basically centuries. But intimacy is at pretty much the lowest point ever in the Western world, and therefore there's a difference between intimacy and intensity. Perhaps there's a concept of relearning closeness that I think we must be much more upfront with. I think it is something that we sort of treat as, well, it will sort of come, but I think our society has a lot of gaps perhaps within not only understanding what closeness is, but being able to create an environments which foster these relationship which embrace closeness. So in that differentiation perhaps of sustainable intimacy and sort of the drama portion that we see a lot with sexuality and the way it's presented in our day to day, really to me, there's a big thing that is sort of replacing those anxious cycles with presence, right? You mentioned this multiple times, with conversation, with presence, with predictable care is another thing that you mentioned, the consistency portions perhaps. So for you, I always love to talk about these micro practices, things in which people that are high achievers can implement in their day to day lives without much frictions. What could be one of those sort of daily micro practice to reliably, I suppose, increase this felt closeness with their partners, that is not some type of 17-step programs, if you could.
Yes. So, first of all, you are 100% right that there's a difference between sex and closeness. Um, they can be connected, but they're not always. And so, building that closeness, there are absolutely things that we can do. Micro is what you mentioned. I won't give you 17 steps, but I will give you a few things
Sure.
that absolutely will make a difference. And so, number one, like I just shared, setting aside that intentional time to sit down and talk with the purpose of building closeness, right? It doesn't happen by accident. Just like going to a gym to work on our physical body, right? Setting aside that time for the relationship and having intentional practice, we see gains. We see a difference when we are really using tools that are shown to be effective, right? We don't have to recreate the wheel. These are things
Right.
that are known. So, number one is setting aside that time. An obvious one is when we have that time together, putting our phones on do not disturb, putting our phones on the side, right? I'm sure, talked about it on this podcast. It's something that we all know. It's not something that we practice very well.
Sure.
And so that's another reminder that if the phone is on the table, if it's in your pocket, even if we're not actively looking at it, the research shows that the physical closeness of the phone to our body affects our attention and affects our focus. I know I'm guilty of it. I can be in a conversation with someone and thinking about, oh, I have to ask ChatGPT that question, or there's a note that I need to write. And I'm paying attention to the other person, but I'm distracted. And so that act of putting our phone on do not disturb, or even physically 5, 10 feet away in the other room, it does make a difference on how we pay attention. So those are the setups. The next thing is really getting into our bodies, right? So, not about just the act of sex, but being in tune with our physical body helps us to be calm, grounded, regulated, and in a relationship, the other person can feel that too. When I'm sitting with my partner, I can tell if they are feeling tense, upset about something, distracted. I don't have to have my hand on their shoulder to be able to feel it. We can read that body language. And so once we have set aside that time to talk, we've put our phones in a different spot. The next thing that I will do and practice in my relationship that I have my couples work on is some form of getting into our body. It could be taking a deep breath together. It could be holding hands. It could be putting on a song and dancing together. Any way that we can get into our bodies and settle our nervous systems together is going to help that presence, and it's going to build intimacy. Right, absolutely. So I'll pause there because those are a few things that we can go more deeply into, but those are like the best bang for your buck, quickest ways to establish presence and an opportunity to build intimacy.
There's this citation. I learned it from Aristotle, but perhaps it was before that. But he talks about the concept that love is composed of a single soul inhabiting two bodies, and it is very much. And I'm talking for obviously in this case monogamic relationships, which I don't talk about other relationship. I have no experience within those. The really what's so interesting to me, and I this is more of a philosophical understanding, but I love your thoughts on this. Again, as we have democratized sexuality to a point where it is pretty much now impossible to avoid. I personally do a lot, as much as I can, to not be basically um, any of my senses actually being tempted to sexual perhaps desires outside my relationship, as I love one person and one person only. That being said, social media. It depends on where you live, but even I was in Vegas. Billboards are basically giving you a number to call for a lady in your hotel room. TV shows. I mean, most of media actually nowadays is sexual to a certain extent. Even publicities, advertising, which we are very much part of that world, is exceptionally sexualized for our society, and perhaps the goal of society to obviously embrace what is necessary for the human species to thrive and to foster perhaps and grow. How do you see that
Mm-hmm.
unfold? How do you see that? How perhaps do you explain how severe those consequences can be on our youth and perhaps on our way that we perceive the value of relationships in the West?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the two things we're talking about go very well together. So if we do not have and do not know how to build true intimate relationships, then again, that need for connection that we all have gets filled with shallow relationships, relationships that are only about sex and not about true connection and presence. It's the difference between eating candy and eating a delicious home cooked meal with color and with vegetables and really nurturing sustenance. So we need food, right? We need food to survive, but there's food that is going to fill my body with health and goodness and vitality, and there's junk food that is going to harm my body in the long run, and I'm not going to feel very good afterwards. So we have that need for food, and it's how we're filling our bodies. And so yeah, it makes sense to me that there are those billboards, and on social media there are such quick ways to satisfy that need for connection.
Yes.
um, but it doesn't truly satisfy that need. It doesn't fill us up, and we keep looking, and we never get enough of that. It's why we can be stuck in our phone for hours, and at the end, we don't feel better. In fact, we feel worse than when we started. And so, rather than living in a world where there's no temptation, it's more about consciously filling our worlds with true connection and deep intimacy. And that can be with friends, that can be with family. It doesn't have to only be reserved for a romantic partner. I feel that we need intimacy in more relationships than, just one. But within your loving relationship, absolutely that need for connection is so strong. And, if we're not actively fostering it in the ways that I'm talking about, having these meaningful conversations where we are able to truly connect, if we don't foster that, then we are going to seek it elsewhere, because we need that connection one way or another. And it's the opportunity that we have to really put energy into creating meaningful ones.
Beautiful. So perhaps with the conversation that are currently happening, and as you foresee the world changing on multiple layers, but keeping a tight focus to relationships, again, relationship with self, relationship with others, what is necessary as a society to do, perhaps to put the necessary guardrails to ensure, I suppose, to promote the fact that the very nature of a healthy society is based on healthy relationships. What do you think is what's necessary, perhaps, to come back to a more sane environments for relationship to thrive? Because let's be very honest, I study this very closely. Relationship in the West. I'm in Canada. You're in the U.S. The numbers are terrible, absolutely terrible, and more and more divorce, more and more perhaps disengagements if they were not or if they were not married. Um, that's I suppose really come from this again ability that we now perhaps foster in our mind of satisfying that urge at all costs, and therefore not making the necessary effort, or at least I think so, necessary efforts to do what is necessary for you to have fulfilling relationships. I recall this quote very often, but the grass is not greener on the other side, it's greener when you water it. It's greener when you take care of it, perhaps. So
Mhm.
what to do from there, if we are both in agreement that a conclusive line such thing is terrible for the society we want to live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So another quote that I love, I'm sure you've heard, it's Mark Twain. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yes.
So the numbers do tell a story, but there are numbers that can also tell a different story as well. And so, yes, there are many people that get married, something happens, they get divorced. And if we only look at that one number, the divorce rate, we can tell a story that people are not able to commit long term, or they don't know how to have long lasting relationships, and it's doom and gloom.
Right.
And so there is some truth to that story, absolutely. The other thing about that story is that women have greater agency today than they did before to
Yes.
have jobs, be financially stable, to leave a relationship that was toxic or unhealthy, and to then find a new relationship, a healthier relationship. So that's part of the story that doesn't always get shared. That um, when marriages were truly until death do us part, that doesn't mean that the relationships were healthy. It doesn't speak to the wellness in those relationships. So that's one part of it.
Hmm.
Another part of it too is that there is greater awareness, especially in the West, where people do have longer lifespans. Uh, if I am married to someone in my 20s, I am a very different person in my 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And so just the fact that people are getting divorced doesn't necessarily mean that their next relationship is unhealthy or toxic. They may have learned a great deal about themselves, and that divorce is a transition, but it could be a transition for both people into new and better relationships. So I want to change the conversation a little bit, a more hopeful direction.
Sure.
That just the statistics on divorce don't tell the whole story. And so my message to people is really more about one relationship at a time, because that's the control that I have. I'm big on, where do I have influence and where do I have control? And if I look at the whole country, I don't have influence on those big numbers. It can feel overwhelming, and uh, then we get into fear mode. And so I try to stay where I have influence. And so the best thing that I can do is within my own relationships, with my children, with my partner, with my family and friends. How can I foster healthy relationships? How can I model the kind of intimacy and presence that I want? And that ripple extends outwards. Then my children have healthy relationships with their friends. My friends with their partners have a healthy influence, and it grows from there. So I try to think in that direction, from starting with me and extending outwards, rather than looking at the whole country and feeling somewhat powerless or worried for our future.
Yeah, be the master of your own world. There's no doubt about that. I see more concern than you are, but that's totally fine. You talk a lot about infidelity, but also the repair action, basically portion of it, the renewal aspect of it, which is even more interesting. I have retrieved a quote from you, which is, "Affairs are hard quakes. Healing is rebuilding to new codes." What do you mean by that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So speaking of numbers, the numbers on relationships that have experienced some kind of infidelity are also staggering. And it's a sign, not that necessarily our society is broken, but that as people, as individuals, there are, again, these patterns, these themes that play out. And so we can label infidelity as bad, which it's certainly harmful. But if that's the end of the conversation, then so many relationships are in trouble, because there's an opportunity there for learning and for growth, when there is an infidelity. Not always, again, coming back to this idea of repair. If we're not able to take accountability for our actions, to truly say we're sorry, to be sorry, and to change that action, then it's not healthy, and then the relationship may need to end. But if there was a mistake that was made and we can acknowledge it, we can take responsibility for it, then there is an opportunity for the relationship to learn from that situation and to grow and to change. Esther Perel, who's a very well-known couples therapist and has several incredible books, she talks about marriage 2.0, that you can be married to the same person, but it's a
Mm.
different marriage 10 years in, 20 years in. Um, so we don't have to go through infidelity in order to learn these things, but very often the couples that I work with have had some form of affair, infidelity, even an emotional affair.
Yes.
Often, what I talk about the most is the emotional affair rather than a physical one, where one partner or both in the couple has had a relationship with another person that crossed emotional boundaries, and that may have been hidden in some way. And for lots of reasons, one person didn't feel able to share with their partner, uh, what was happening or why it was happening. Um, and so, yeah, that there is an opportunity for renewal there, but the caveat is, it does have to be something that is changed or ended. If there's a couple where there's an ongoing affair and there's not that remorse or that desire to change, then of course that's unhealthy, and there's not an opportunity for the relationship to heal if that's happening.
Another thing that is on the rise because of such thing is obviously co-parenting. And
Mhm.
I heard you talk at great length about co-parenting with dignity, which is so important. I was a child of co-parenting myself, and therefore, and it was actually a decent co-parenting experience, all things considered, which I'm very grateful for. Um,
Mhm.
there's this there's this concept that obviously we don't stop being a family. We change how the family works, meaning that obviously if we are in a relationships, we're no longer in relationships. The family is still, we're still a family. It will always be your mother, always be your father, always be your children's, and so on. You talk very often about three agreements that makes co-parenting calmer and more consistent. What are they, and explain them a bit further for our audience, please?
Hmm, certainly. Well, and that's a subject that's very close to me as well. I was, a teenager when my parents divorced,
Yeah.
and I'm divorced now, and I co-parent my two children with my ex-wife. With my co-parent, and so it's something that I do every day. And the pre-agreement part of it, um, is, again, it's an intentional thing that we do. It doesn't happen by accident. And so in my relationship, my co-parent and I, when we were married and together and things were going very well in our relationship, we had conversations then about, if we do divorce or separate, what kind of relationship do we want to have? How do we want to co-parent? Because we, for both of us, had lived that as children growing up, and we wanted to make sure that we were going to parent in a way that was healthy for our children. And so, again, it comes back to having these conversations, creating a plan, creating a framework for it. And so, when I work with couples who are either just getting separated or have been separated for a long time, there are a few things that I recommend. And so, number one for co parenting is deciding what's the best way for us to communicate with each other. For some couples, it's strictly over email or over text message. And if that's what works for them, that's fine. But it's coming to an agreement of how do we communicate. For other couples that are co-parenting, they're able to speak on the phone or to meet in person, and that's okay. But having the medium established for how we communicate with each other and about what kinds of things will we talk to each other. For some couples, they're in touch every single day. They may be talking about the kids' activities or the plan for the weekend, where they're going. For other couples, it may be less frequent. And that's okay also. But as long as each person knows what are the kinds of things that we talk about and what triggers a conversation, it's going to go much better um, than having unexpected conversations or about topics that are sensitive. So, again, it comes back to being really intentional and having that agreement with the other parent about how we will speak to each other.
Beautiful. Coming back to the light, smiles and happiness a little bit here. There is a there's a concept which I love a lot, which is to think of partners as a trusted teammate. To me, and I see this very often, there's nothing wrong with it if it is your current setting, but I found it to be perhaps let's just say interesting, is there's many relationships, and I hear this at my age, when they're in your 20s, I hear that at pretty much any age these days, is I feel like my partner is an opponent. The concept of team, the concept of we are together. Let's just take what the marriage is saying, which is now you are one, right? I always love what Dave Ramsey said, which is the priest that now you're one, not a partnership. Talking about the money aspects of how those relationships are run. This is so important, as you said, because of the increase independence of women, which is definitely something to keep in mind. And let's not be foolish, like you said. There are the increase in divorce is also because the ability of those two people, again, in monogamic relationships, have way more power now to be able to do so. So there's that portions. That being said, I still think this concept of being a team is so important, is so fundamental to what a couple is. And I always came back to my one of my first quotes, actually, at the bottom of my email signature when I started in business. I was 17, and it was alone. Alone, perhaps you go fast, and together we go far, which is an African proverb, which I never found the author of. If the audience you know it, or maybe you know it, then let me know. But it's a great one. The concept of, again, the being a team. How fundamental do you think that is? And perhaps past the conversation points, what are some rituals that can be done to increase the couple's sense of being on the same side?
Yes. Yes. I love that quote also. I don't know who to attribute it to, but I love it as well. And it is absolutely true. And uh, it's a very important point. So when I'm in a session with a couple or when I'm teaching a group, right? So in my program, again, the intimacy shift, when I'm teaching that program, a large part of the meat of that program is learning how to be on a team, us versus whatever the problem is.
Yes.
And there are ways to do that. There are practices. And so a lot of my training and therapy comes from emotionally focused therapy, which is a highly researched, highly regarded form of therapy. Dr. Sue Johnson is the person that first started that framework, and I encourage your listeners to check her out. And she has a number of books. And so, some of the skills that she teaches are reflection and validation. And so often in my sessions with couples, one person will bring up a hurt or an issue, and that will trigger a hurt or an issue in the other person. And then couples can get caught in a cycle where whose hurt or issue is the more important one. And okay, you have a hurt, but I have a hurt. And we just go back and forth and we stay stuck in this competition of, whose hurt feelings are the bigger feelings.
Right.
And so the way out of that cycle is being vulnerable about our need for connection and taking care of one person's feelings first. So we can't take care of both person's issue at the same time. So to be on a team, it does require addressing one person's issue first. I don't have to agree with them entirely, but I do have to understand where they're coming from to validate that their experience is real and important, and I can see where they're coming from. And I'll repeat that just because it's so important. But to be on the same team with someone, I really have to understand where they're coming from and to validate their feelings as real. Once I can do that, you're going to feel and you're going to see the other person, they're going to relax, right? Because when I am upset about something, I'm tense and
Yes.
I can't let it go because it's upsetting to me. But once I feel understood and seen and validated, I can exhale, I can relax, and now I can return that favor. I can hear what's upsetting you. I can validate your experience, let you know that I see you. And now that both of us have both had our feelings validated, and now we can approach the world together, right? We can be on the same side. Because when we are feeling hurt or threatened, it's hard to be on a team. We're in survival mode. And so if I'm upset about something, if I don't think my partner understands me, understands the feeling, then I am defending myself. I have a wall up and I'm not able to be on a team. We can only be on a team with our partner when we feel safe and understood and loved. And now, okay, I can let the other person in, and now we can approach the world together.
Wonderful. Online therapy is another, I suppose, portions of this conversation has been steadily increasing over the last couple of years. We see product and services like BetterHelp, for example, which has done a major advertising campaigns on all sorts of social medias and others. Obviously you believe that it actually works. That is part of what you're doing, which is very important. When you're thinking about building an effective virtual practice, the structure, obviously the privacy element that we hear more and more about these days, the engagement tactics, right? There's a difference between an in-person conversation and a virtual conversation, and I can I can attest to that because we, as an agency, as a marketing agency ourselves, we see it right away. Our conversion rate in person is just much greater because the understanding in person is typically much greater. So within all that in mind, but also the positive of online therapy, typically cost being a little bit less, typically the ease obviously of exceeding one of your sessions because you can be together in your living room, for example. You don't need to travel for it. You can also pick maybe a therapist that you really enjoy that is not close enough to you, it won't be basically you won't be able to just fly into wherever they are on a weekly or monthly basis. So without all the added benefits and negative, I suppose, from your perspective, what telehealth design choices is most important to improve disclosures, improve perhaps how people feel within it, follow through, success rate? Tell me more about what makes it successful in 2025.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and a lot of the key points you've raised already. So, number one, uh, ease of access, right? So
Yeah.
many people that I speak with, they would not be in therapy if not for the option of meeting with someone online. So, number one, with online therapy, you're able to reach so many more people that you wouldn't otherwise. And there's a number of barriers. For some people, it is an element of time, and especially with the couples that I work with who are parents. If they're not able to get childcare, then they're not able to get this kind of help. So the access is a key feature to online therapy where so many more people are able to participate that wouldn't already. And then the other part, right, trying to get the quality of care. So, depending on where you live, you may not have access to the person that you want to work with or the person who specializes in what you're struggling with.
Yes.
And so being able to search online for the right person to find that right fit makes all the difference too, because not all therapists are created equal, and not all of those relationships are the right fit. So I could be in person with someone that's not actually the best therapist for me, and meeting with someone online is going to work much better because that's the expert who specializes in what I need help with. So those are those elements. The other part of it is that there's quite a bit of research now that's come out on the effectiveness of online therapy, and proving that even though it's a different conversation being in the same room versus being online, they're not exactly the same, but they are just as effective.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so you're not quite comparing the exact same things, because you're right, being in person does feel different, and there's different parts of being in person that are very beneficial. But there's other parts that are a struggle too, because when you're in person with someone, it can be more challenging to share details about yourself. There's a different desire to please, and
Yes.
so the difference between maybe like a sales based conversation or a therapy conversation, when you're talking with someone in person about sales, not that there's pressure, but that social pressure of wanting to say yes, wanting to please that person is different when you're in the same room. And when you're having a therapeutic conversation, not every session, but many sessions, I will have people say, this is so much more comfortable for me to tell you, Dan, about what I'm struggling with, because I know that you don't live in the same town as me. And we're having this conversation. I'm at home, I'm in my safe place, and I feel so much more able to share and be honest and open for those reasons. So that's another benefit to online therapy that I'm glad you asked about.
Yes. Very cool. I want to finish like we always finish, Dan, with, I suppose, growth and gratitudes and the future of relationships as you see it. So, obviously, using gratitude as a performance enhancer is exceptionally important, exceptionally powerful for relationships. Reinforcing micro wins, which we talked about, was fantastic. Savoring progress, right? One thing that we typically don't do as human beings is not only seeing where we want to go, but also be quite grateful about where we've been, and therefore where we are right now is something that is huge on a personal and on a shared level. Tracking momentum also is another thing that I like to do with my partner, and saying, well, look, yes, the objective seems quite far away, but look where we started. Perhaps that's a very very interesting indicator, and I suppose pleasing aspect of relationship building. Form your perspective. Um, as we're seeing now relationships, as we're seeing society, I suppose, redefine what those means, what those words even means, through the lens of technology, through the lens of perhaps how culture are now being embedded together through mondializations and others. How do you see your practice at growth and gratitudes growing, and perhaps the future of it? And what is your take on how relationship is going to be unfolding moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you're referencing some of the important parts of being grateful and noticing the things that we are grateful for each day. So it feeds on itself. The more often we notice what we're grateful for, the more often we see things in the world to be grateful for, the more positive we feel. And so, an interesting statistic that's from John and Julie Gottman, who are relationship experts, researchers. So, what they have found is that it's at least a 5-to-1 ratio of positive interactions or feeling grateful moments to every one that maybe is a setback or a negative. So it's not one-to-one. We really need to overwhelm ourselves and our relationships with gratitude and with positivity to really feel the kinds of effects that you're describing. So it's not a one-time thing. It's really a part of life. It's a part of our personality to foster just being a grateful person as many moments during the day as possible. So that's an area of growth that I see for all of us, is more often during the day checking in with what we are grateful for. It can be a small thing, it can be a big thing, any kind of thing. But the practice of noticing what we are grateful for makes a huge difference. And in the work that I do, that's something that I start every session with is, what are we feeling grateful for in our life or in our relationships today? And I set that as a foundation because no matter what we talk about for the rest of the session, we can always come back to what's going well. And if we don't do that at the very beginning of the session, we may only talk about the problems and the struggles, and we're going to leave the session with that mindset that it's all problems and struggles. And that's just not the case for anybody. We all have things that are going well in our lives and things that we can grow with. So that's absolutely a fundamental practice for me. And you mentioned kind of growing the business as a whole, growing the work that I do. And, this program that I've mentioned a few times now, the Intimacy Shift, which your listeners can visit. It's, pretty easy to remember, theintimacyshift.com. I've got a free resource there of a way to structure the kinds of conversations I've mentioned throughout this talk. So if you go to theintimacyshift.com, you're going to get a PDF guide, and it's going to be a blueprint for unlocking these kinds of conversations with your partner to build trust, to build intimacy, to grow the closeness in your relationship. And so this program that I've developed, it's not one-on-one therapy. It's a group model where as many people can join as possible. And it's an educational program. It's me teaching these skills and these practices that I've learned over the years and how to apply them in your relationship. So it's a different twist. Therapy is its own set of things, which is very important. And this group educational program is really how to apply these skills right away. Proven practices that will change your relationship quickly without that kind of form of weekly therapy where you could be doing that work for several years, depending on what's going on. This group model is a much quicker approach to be able to put practices in place right away.
Wonderful. Like Rumi said, wear gratitude like a clock, and it will feed every corner of your life. Dr. Dan Sneider, it was a pleasure to have you on the Meaningful Podcast. Thank you for being so authentic and again so calm. I feel like I came back from meditation talking with you, and I would love if you can leave our audience with some last words of wisdom, please.
Absolutely, Sam. It was a pleasure for me too. I appreciate all of your questions and the way that you approach the world as well. And so one thing that I want to leave your audience with is, that we are always one deep breath away from things getting better, and slowing down to pause mindfully and take a breath before we say something that could be hurtful, before we do something impulsive, just taking that pause, that one deep breath is going to change things for the better.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.